Let's talk about cloud security today. So it's just sort of like a gender overview. We're going to talk, give an introduction. We'll talk about the threats and the risks, give some overview of cloud security best practices, and sort of like dive into them, and talk about this thing, cloud controls matrix. Okay, so generally speaking, right, 60% of the world's data or corporate data is in the cloud in some way, shape, or form. And, in some regards, cloud data centers take up a lot of power usage, but overall, it's not significant in general. We're talking about 3% of the world's energy consumption. You can look at that as a small number or a large number, but we're talking about total compute power. And then 90% or more of all the enterprises, large, small, have adopted, some type of multi-cloud infrastructure. Probably most, if not all, have adopted some form of cloud infrastructure. But here we're talking about sort of a multi-cloud infrastructure that would be AWS at Google or some other combination to represent a multi-cloud infrastructure. And it's a big market. We're talking about $150 billion for cloud data storage, cloud data centers, however you want to describe that number. So let's get into cloud security. What is cloud security? It refers to all the policies, all the tech or technologies, and the controls, meaning how do you govern access or implement secure configuration that protect data, applications, and infrastructure in cloud computing environments. So it's basically the set of practices that are followed to protect data, whether that be one customers or all in cloud computing environments. There's some, general understanding of the benefits of cloud security, but here we're talking about what are the benefits in relation to cloud security versus non-cloud security. One of the benefits is 24/7 visibility. And what does that mean? That means every day and every hour of the year, there is systems in place to help gather information, analyze, and monitor the the status of cloud security at any moment in time. What else does cloud security provide? Provides higher availability than most on-premise infrastructures. And it doesn't mean that you couldn't provide similar high availability, but just out of the box, it would provide higher availability. It has improved capabilities for data security because it's not a situation where one company is implementing their own security controls in the cloud. You have one company as the provider offering these cloud security controls. So therefore, they are able to improve those controls for everyone. And that overall can help to improve data security. And then you have the notion of advanced threat detection. So that means that there's systems in place that are advanced in nature, more than the norm, and they're able to help companies who are utilizing the cloud better detect threats. What are some of the risks? Well, one of the risks is if you have all these things in the cloud and have all these capabilities, they could be misconfigured. So you could have a risk called misconfigured cloud services. And that means a system or a collection of systems running in the cloud could be incorrectly configured, and that would lead to possible data exposure, maybe unauthorized access, or other security vulnerabilities, right? So configuration of cloud services is a critical component because companies don't automatically get a, a comprehensive configuration just by putting your systems in the cloud. There are capabilities to help secure systems, but they have to be configured correctly. And that leads to this notion of cloud shared responsibility model or matrix, right? So if a company is going to utilize cloud services, sure, the capabilities are available to secure things properly, to have an advanced security posture, but the operator, meaning the tenant, has the control and the ability to configure these things, much like the provider is offering those capabilities. And both parties need to work together to make sure that all aspects of security are enforced, maintained, or at the adequate level to provide the right level of service. So in here you see a basic question. What aspect of security am I responsible for if I put my systems in the cloud? Well, if you're utilizing like cloud email, you don't want to give away the wrong access to a cloud mailbox, right? Cloud email mailbox. So every organization, or most organizations nowadays, I'm not gonna say every, but most organizations are using some form of cloud email. All organizations likely are utilizing, in some aspect, the delivery part probably goes through the cloud. So you have to understand, well, where is my data and how is it protected? And that sort of leads to this question of what aspects of security am I responsible for? Well, if you want to make sure your data is secure, you're going to look for all aspects and make sure the responsibility is properly governed, whether that be your company, whether that be your partner company that you're working with, or whether that be the cloud provider, which you might be able to make a recommendation to say, hey, your system is not as secure as that could be. Can you implement this additional feature so things could be more secure, right? You want to make sure things like code errors and operations, the operations of IT is at up to snuff as much as possible. And for a cloud provider, it's a sort of competitive advantage to be able to offer more security capability because that's something everyone that's using the cloud could take advantage of and would have to implement themselves if they were not in the cloud. Okay, so I talked about email. Here's an example of a way to protect data in the cloud. So if you're utilizing some type of database, which email does, you might be able to tokenize and encrypt data and then store that in the database in the cloud. And what does that do for you? Well, number one, tokenization sort of provides a masking of that security material that you would use if you tried to utilize like an encryption key or a password or some other feature, right? So it hides that or hides it away from regular use, but it also enables you to encrypt or secure data encrypt through encryption in the cloud in a way that someone wouldn't easily know what that key is to unlock that secure data in the cloud, right? So it's great that you can secure data in the cloud, but if you don't secure the mechanisms that you're using to secure that data, if you don't know where they are, if you don't have a good access control on those mechanisms, then while your data might be stored securely, someone has the key to unlock the data and is really not that secure if that's the case. Okay, so here's this sort of little dive into encryption, right? In this case, the data owner would encrypt the data. They would put it into the server in an encrypted format, and then the user would pull up the key and then query that data with usage of that key, right, to unlock whatever their access is to the data. Now, another important point here is to understand, well, if a user has full access to all data, then you have to worry about this user's and the controls around this user to make sure that their environment that they're using to interact with the cloud services is secure as well. But if the user has a limited set of access to data, maybe their user secret key does not provide full access to all data, then you really probably need to be just generally concerned about how well is my data being protected on the server. And then you could take a minimized view of the user and say, well, if the user doesn't access like really secure information, like somebody's credit card or social security number or other things of that nature, then I'm less concerned. But you're still concerned in general because you don't want this user and the access to the system to be compromised in any manner. But you can then take a sort of more heightened view of someone who may have higher level permissions. All right, let's talk a little bit about threats and risks now that we gave a good understanding of how to put data in the cloud and how to protect it with encryption. What are the risks? So there's actually a lot of risks utilizing the cloud, but here's sort of four high level ones. One is possible if you're using a cloud application that supports an API, it's possible that API might have some inherent risks, like insecure APIs, it's called. And whether that be because the access is not well defined, or it's because the application that runs the API has not been fully vetted from a security or application security point of view, you could consider maybe this insecure API concept could be a concern. You also have the risk of data breaches. We all probably heard of once a week at least, or maybe once a day, some type of data breach that occurs. Well, if 90% of large organizations have some form of multi cloud environments, it's likely that if they experience a data breach, that data breach is likely involved some way, shape, and form with their cloud services, right? So cloud services has a different advantage where it speeds up a company's time to market to deliver applications, but also that in itself, if not followed properly, could cause a risk. And that would one of the reasons that could cause additional risk is through misconfigured cloud services. So if companies are able to speed up their time to market to deliver applications which provide benefits to users, then if you don't properly vet the configuration of those cloud services, you might quickly develop an application in the cloud and then have some inherent risks that it's not fully securely configured, and you have to deal with that either on an ongoing basis or some type of pen test analysis remediation process that helps you constantly improve that. You also have the notion of lack of control. So if your data is in the cloud, depending what type of cloud it is, you're not you're sharing services and resources with other users of that cloud environment. It would be really good for you to know what is the sphere of control that your applications, your data, your systems are in the same buckets or environments. Because if one application in the cloud becomes inherently insecure, that could have a lack of control and affect you. It would be good to know what that risk is. Okay, data breaches, right? So, what is it? Data breach occurs when a hacker gains unauthorized access to information. It could also be unauthorized access to sensitive information, right? That is a problem in today's world, is that sometimes applications cannot be fully secured because whether it's impossible or not, there's also a cost factor to doing that, and there's also other considerations in regards to that. But data breaches is a common problem, and as we mentioned, is a common security risk in the cloud. We talked about insecure APIs, and I sort of gave a couple of examples. But since APIs are readily used to connect different components of systems, like if you go to Google as a web page, if you look at all the calls, the links that are involved with creating that web page, you'll see a lot of requests to APIs. Well, if those are behind each web page, 4 or 5 different calls, maybe 4 or 5 different systems, you have to make sure that those things are properly secured to make sure data or anything involved with those APIs do not have poor security practices, right? And more and more systems are being enabled by web APIs. So it would be a real benefit to make sure that your application does not have this security risks. We went over lack of control, right? Whether that be your application, could also include physical and logical security of that cloud infrastructure. In one case, you might really trust AWS is doing a great job, but if you have some other type of cloud, maybe a third-party cloud, you would want to make sure that the governance is in place to ensure that your organization's data is maintaining its level of control that you're looking for. That includes data ownership, data management, and data control. Okay, now we talked about, all these things. Let's jump into best practices that you could follow to benefit or improve cloud security. So the areas we're going to talk about here are authentication and access, encryption and data protection, security monitoring and logging, and then jump into or talk a little bit about disaster recovery and business continuity. So authentication and access control. This is an important component as it helps to identify a user and their access to a system, right? So there's many different ways you can implement authentication and access control, and that sort of is dependent on the model that you as a company or organization want to follow. But you'll find that cloud security enables things like identity and access management so that you can verify the identity of users and control the access of the data or the systems that you want those users to use. It could also be the same concept for not just users, but also services. So services that are running in your cloud that need access to data to perform automated functions, they need an advanced level of authentication and access control as well, so that those applications can function in a secure manner. Okay, so from a best practice point of view in regards to encryption and data protection is everyone's taken this model, encrypt everything, but not, best practice would be not only encrypt everything, but verify that everything is encrypted in a way that you expect it to be encrypted. So if you've taken a good example is if you take one key and apply that to all your data, then your security approach is based on this one key. But if you take one key and apply it to each individual user, so you have a key for user A, you have another key for user B, you have another key for user C, and you can apply that to, you can interchange user with organization, or you can interchange user with application. If you take a more segmented approach, then you'd be able to implement maybe a higher level of security, but you would then have to make sure you're doing a great job of managing all those keys because you have a little bit more housekeeping to maintain. The nice thing is cloud security systems or cloud providers, they offer higher level of key management systems that are uh, that are not usually implemented by most companies. They offer them as part of their service suite. Okay, let's talk about security monitoring and logging. And I alluded to this a little bit, but it doesn't make sense to try and have advanced security if you're not going to verify you have advanced security. So I have a sort of general um, business approach is that I everyone is doing the right thing, but then you have a process to make sure you verify everyone is doing the right thing. So you have a trust and verify mentality. Doesn't mean that you don't trust anybody by verifying. It just means you want to make sure things are double checked. And in the cloud, they do something similar. They offer you advanced tooling to give you continuous monitoring of cloud systems and services which would help you point out suspicious activity, maybe some unauthorized access, maybe malware or other security threats. Or it could also provide you a report that tells you, hey, this user A was granted this access, and this logging and monitoring system is showing us that users A usage of this system is in accordance with our expectations from a security perspective. So you can use it to look for bad things, and you could use it to verify that good things are happening. And while security monitoring and logging is a good best practice, verification is a best practice as well to make sure what is happening aligns with what you expect is happening. And then to wrap it up here from a best practice point of view, and something inherently cloud systems provide that you could take advantage of is disaster recovery and business continuity. And a nice thing about cloud security is these things can be done in an automated fashion. When things are done in the cloud, there is a um, prioritization for automation. The reason being efficiency, because cloud systems are not inexpensive. Most cloud systems or services are more expensive than on premise systems. But because they offer all this operational advantage through automation, maybe it's a value add and valuable service to you as the consumer because you now have readily access to all these best practices. And when we talk about disaster recovery and business continuity, is they're kind of the same, but they're a little bit different. So disaster recovery might give you a backup, and you have this backup file maybe you're doing every day, and the cloud can help to automate that so that you have that backup every day. But if you don't have an understanding of how you might get data back from that backup, you don't really have a good understanding of how you might carry on normal business activity. And that whole notion about how to utilize your disaster recovery capability is what they consider business continuity. Business continuity helps you address what can I do to make sure that my business can stay operable in the best fashion possible with the systems that I have. And if it means that if I only back up once a day, well, my business continuity can only restore data possibly once per day, right? Only at that one time. So you might want to take a different strategy. And instead of backing up once a day, you might want to back up all the little changes each hour so that then you can have a stronger business continuity approach and be able to look at your disaster recovery tools and say, hey, instead of being able to provide business continuity once per day, I might be able to provide it 24 hours per day because I have an incremental backup occurring each hour. And it gets into a lot of other details like how you would perform that, who would do what work. Is that system also secure? Because it also doesn't make sense to really secure your data, but then not have a secure backup process or business continuity process. But aside, what disaster recovery and business continuity provide for you as a user is a way for you to help keep your business running as best as possible under various different scenarios. Okay, let's talk about this thing called cloud controls matrix. So there's a company out there, or I guess it's a company. You can look it up, CSA. They maintain this thing called cloud controls matrix. And you'll see all these different categories here. Human resources, all the way to governance and risk management, including encryption and key management, data center security. You could look at these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 16 categories, 17 categories, sorry, of good areas to provide visibility and control into your cloud infrastructure. And what does it mean? Well, governance and risk management might be important, but that doesn't help me implement threat and vulnerability management. So these are two different categories that are important and will help you sort of manage these 133 controls across these 17 categories. But if you can address or assess these controls in your environment, maybe you could start to work on implementing 1, 2, 3 additional controls based on your prioritization mechanism so that you can help to improve the security of your organization. And likely everyone doesn't realize, but human resource security is a really important component of your overall security strategy as a company. Because if going back to some of the examples we provided before, but if you give a user of your system a computer with all the access necessary to access your system, but you do not have a way to offboard that user if that is a necessary strategy for your company, which is likely all companies need a strategy to onboard and offboard people, then you might put your company at risk by giving someone access to the system and not being able to remove that access. And the same goes on if you could look in that area, it talks about vendors and things of that nature. But if you're hiring individuals that do not have the right backgrounds, that could be a risk for your company as well. And while it's not a technical security risk, it is a governance risk for your organization. And you might want to take a look at these 133 controls, get an idea of what the CCM looks like. You'll see here, I'm trying to go a little bit faster. You have this representation of shared security model. You'll see that the customer has all these responsibilities: customer data, platform, operating system, and all those other capabilities. And then you have the cloud provider like AWS having some responsibilities. While the customer doesn't always provide all the software, and the provider provides most of the infrastructure software, the provider is responsible for maintaining the security of that software, the compute, storage, the database, networking, all those things, and to offer other responsibilities like we talked about, availability zones and regions to support redundancy, business continuity, or other things like that. So this is a good representation from CCM about that shared security model. All right, so let's jump into what does a roadmap look like, because I alluded to it a little bit by utilizing those 133 controls. You can break it down into phases, and that's a good way to approach most projects. If you're just diving into projects and trying to get work done, it's not always the best outcome. Also, it's hard to provide to other stakeholders of the project status of where that project is if you don't have a good foundation through phases. And in phase one, you're going to sort of lay down the foundation. What is the regulatory environment that you're operating in? So what controls apply? Make sure your team and the other stakeholders understand, in addition to yourself, shared responsibility. And then you're going to ramp up as fast as possible. Well, because you want to start getting into securing things. When you jump into phase two, take a look at some benchmarks, right? What exists that shows you what the right level of security should be. And you'll see in this diagram or this image, everyone wants strong security, but everyone wants a whole lot of usability. you're going to have to balance those two things, right? And there a benchmark for that would be a good place to start. And then you're going to start to establish your model for how security might be implemented or your approach to cloud security. All right, phase 3, you're moving along. You need to sort of take a look back at what you did, and you're going to try and always optimize. If you see in this animated image, it's a constantly running process. So when you think you fixed one thing and made it more secure, any day or any change could change that approach. So you constantly have to revisit all your controls through a risk review process in phase 3 to make sure that the level of security is constantly maintained. And you might look at something like this. If you're lucky and you could sort of plan out your next year, in your first quarter, you can take up 2.5 tasks, regulatory framework, share responsibilities, skills ramp up. Maybe you need to sort of take a couple classes or get a couple certifications in the cloud. That would be part of your foundational sort of approach. Then when you jump into the next area, in 2 quarters, you could sort of tackle another 2.5 areas of your project. And then you could continue to skill up. And then you're sort of in the skill up phase, you're into this 6-month approach, right? You get in that skill. And then you could start to really apply the benchmark and establish your model or your approach. And then at the end, you're going to optimize, right? Once those established controls are in place, you're going to constantly fine tune them and do a risk review and maybe even this thing called attack simulation. An attack simulation could look like a pen test, could look like a more simplified vulnerability scan. Whatever that looks like is a good way for you to give visibility about how to tackle these components, foundational, implementation, and optimization, and then also be able to plan that out over a year's time so you can really make some progress. Are there any questions for me?
Hello, I have one question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
I have a question. If you can show again the pizza slide.
Sorry, what slide?
Pizzas. Where software as a service, as a software platform as a service.
Okay, hold
these
on.
Slides.
Give me a
in
second.
The beginning.
I'm going to go back. You tell me when to stop. So not this slide, right?
No. In the beginning, you have shown infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and the software as a service.
Okay, 1 second.
It was in the beginning.
I believe it's the eighth slide.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it was just in the beginning.
Excuse me, I have a little cold.
That's the one.
Here.
Oh, back
Yes,
here?
exactly.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Now I have question. I can understand if I have infrastructure as a service, I can create my security, my infrastructure, my own. So I'll be sure that my informations, my data are secure. But if I have software as a service, how can I be sure that, or how can we secure our data's informations or our what we have doing our works on this platform? I mean, as when we take as a service, software as a service, I mean SaaS.
Okay, so why don't I give like a general example and tell me if this helps you understand it. So a good representation. Let's instead of using the pizza model, take and bake versus dining out. Let's say, what if we implement a database in the infrastructure as a service model versus the software as a service model, right? So AWS and any of these other cloud providers like Google, they will offer you a database in the SaaS model. You don't have to do anything to run that database, right? In the best case scenario, they're also providing you an application in front of that database. But let's just take it at a high level and say, if I'm trying to implement a database, what does that look like? Well, if I stand up a database in an infrastructure as a security model, I have to make sure I maintain the software for that database and all the details about the permissions and the configuration settings, because as an infrastructure service model, I have to maintain all those components. In the software or the platform as a service, if you want to call it that, but actually nowadays, a lot of these databases that are provided are really a full-on SaaS platform. All you need to do is read in and read out of the database. And even you're provided an interface for utilizing access to the database and to perform your work functions. So you need to understand, how do you do it? Well, first you need to look up from that provider what are the best practices that are provided for that service. And then you need to understand that it's possible that a cloud provider cannot implement security in a certain way within that database. And you have to take a best practice approach from them. So one way to do it, and just to get through your question as fast as possible, is if I was operating a database in an infrastructure as a service model to meet my compliance need, I could maybe encrypt that database, the whole thing. Okay, that's great. Maybe that's already being done by the cloud provider in the paths of the SaaS model. But what you can do is you can take it a step further and apply the example that I provided. Well, if you are encrypting data with one key, the whole database, a better approach might be to encrypt the data with individual keys for each user. So now the data is stored inside the database at a field level in an encrypted form. So no one can log into the database and see the real data. But you need to implement some other components to make that happen. And you might need to architect your application to enable that ability. I think the answer to your question is not always 100% straightforward, but it requires some understanding of how those two environments work and what you can do to leverage those two environments to make it the most secure for your application. Does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. It helps.
And I think your question might be a little bit more advanced, right? Hopefully I gave you an answer that you can understand, but it really depends. That's the answer. You need to understand, make an assessment, and then implement it in a manner that'll help you achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve. Anyone else have a question? Well, I couldn't have done that great of a job.
David, how many levels of skill set exist within cloud security, do you think? I mean, there's obviously entry level, and there's the master security, cloud security person. How many levels, and how long does it take to achieve the foundational skill set in cloud security, do you think?
Excuse me. So, like anything, right, you start with some path. And to set up a foundational approach, foundational level security, it's a good 5-6 month effort to work on that. Now it depends on each individual, just to get and what you're going after. I had this discussion, I think, last night, and I showed a slide that showed 33 different categories of how to apply security. And just related to this talk, we talked about 17 different categories and 133 actual controls. So to understand all those 133 controls, or the way I mapped it in the other class was five pieces of expertise per category. So now you're up to maybe 155, or obviously larger, maybe 175, whatever that looks like. My math is not working right now, but it takes a good amount of time to work on it with the guidance and the preparation of someone to walk you through that learning process. If you were to do it on your own, you have to make sure that you have the right set of material or training materials to give you that understanding. Because just as an example, going back to the previous question, if you understand these terms on-premise, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, but you don't really understand all the parts that make up those areas, you're not going to be able to be in a situation out of the gate to take on a high level position. You'll be looking for an entry level, learn as you go job. And you'll also be faced with continuously learning and learning more about how these things work, because the cloud today might be in a certain state of security. In 6 months or a year from now, the cloud providers will be changing and updating different things, adding different services and features that might require you to keep learning, to keep pace with their pace of innovation. So to answer your question, it's going to take at least 6 months to get that going, and then something you'll be working on for the remainder of your time in a career.
Okay, great, thank you. Other questions from participants? Before I give a few closing remarks, and I want to let you know what we have going on at CyberWarrior coming up that's related to this. I'm actually curious first if people are willing to have a show of hands, and I know we're getting up against time. Or if you just want to say so, how many people in the audience right now work in cloud security? And how many people in the audience are thinking about getting into cloud security or cybersecurity in general? Okay. As a related program to this, we are offering a licensure program, certification program on Azure coming up early in 2024. Clara, do you have details that you can share right now on that program?
Yes, we have a Microsoft Azure training program. We will basically give a review on the theory behind Microsoft Azure, and then we will spend 2 weeks doing a capstone project. So you can demonstrate to any hiring manager that you have the skills and the capacity to put everything into action. This class will start January 22. I can send you any information by email if you want.
And if you want to reach out to Clara to get information as well, her email is, well, actually, contact at Clara. Which email should they use?
You share the email on the chat.
Okay. And again, if anyone is interested personally or knows people who may be interested, maybe you work for a company that needs to beef up its cloud security understanding and skill set, whatever you think is needed. But it is, Azure is, David might know this, or Clara might know this, what percentage of companies out there use Azure?
I would say a large number, because anyone using Microsoft products is nowadays likely using Azure. Specifically, most people don't realize Office 365 runs on Azure. So if you take that perspective, every organization needing Word, PowerPoint, Excel are all already using Azure, even if they don't have a specific Azure account.
Okay, so the demand is out there, the need to understand is out there. So it would be great if anyone is interested in that. I guess that is it for me, unless anyone has any other questions from the audience. Otherwise, we will thank you for attending and wish you a tremendous holiday season.